there were moments where my parents would sit us kids down and say, right, we are actually running out of money for this month, and we've still got school fees to pay, and we've got electricity to pay, and we still need to buy the last load of groceries before the month's out. And we just, from a realistic standpoint, we just don't have the resource to be able to get through this month. We need to sit down together and we need to pray, and we need to trust that God is going to come through for us.
You are listening to the Under the Rug podcast with Nalini Tranquim.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Under the Rug. What a wonderful ride this season of Under the Rug has been so far. We've appreciated all of your comments and feedback on the prior episodes. Today we look towards the unknown. How does one navigate the present when the future bears so much uncertainty? What does it mean to have faith? The last few topics have been quite heavy to say the least, but this will be a relatively casual, candid conversation. So grab yourself a hot cup of tea, sit back, relax, and let's go on a little adventure. Nalini.
Hello.
How are you?
I am good.
Good?
I am good, and I'm excited for this little adventure we're about to have.
I think it's going to be a good one. So, you have quite the documented past, I believe.
Yes.
Some could say you've even wrote the book on Nalini Tranquim.
Yes.
I guess one place that I'd like to start off would be going way back to the very beginning. Growing up in Africa. What was that like?
Wow. I don't think I realized what I had in my upbringing until I went back recently.
Yeah.
After 25 odd years. It going back actually conjured up a whole heap of memories that I had lost sight of, because we've traveled so much over my life. But growing up in Africa, what was that like? It was very detached from the rest of the world and in a beautiful way. And it really did frame, or has played an integral part in the framing of who I am.
Yeah, I can imagine, because you're dealing with a completely different cultural, societal norm in your upbringing to pretty much everyone who's around you right now.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you find that you struggle to relate to people's upbringings and their childhood memories?
Well, it's interesting actually, because obviously going back to Africa, I spoke at my old school, my old high school.
Yeah.
And it felt like I had come home, and there was just no hesitation on my part at all to just speak and to connect with the kids, and connected with them really well. And what a beautiful bunch they were. And then coming back to Australia, knowing in my mind's eye that I need to get into the schools, I've actually been petrified at the thought, because it's a completely different culture. And the generation of kids in the first world, even though it's the same generation, we're talking same age group, is so different to that of the third world. So, yes, that's a hurdle I have to confront.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Even in regards to just relaying your upbringing to the people around you who you interact with here now in Australia. I remember you mentioning that Sandro had bumped into a few old friends while you guys were in Zimbabwe, and how that was kind of a interesting little moment of levity for him that he hasn't really been able to experience, because he's lived most of his life at this point outside of Africa.
Yes, it was so bizarre. It's funny because I find myself heading down a rabbit hole in thought when I spend time with anyone who is still living in either the same house that they were raised in, or at least the same community that they grew up in.
Yeah.
Because we just don't have that. I left when I was 18. Sandro was 19. So it was surreal going back and seeing some of our old loved ones from 25 years ago, and carrying on from almost like from where we had left off, And yet, when we left as children, and now we're going back as adults.
Yeah.
It was a trip.
Yeah. And I mean,
Literally.
you couldn't have predicted in the slightest the roadmap that your life was going to take, because the difference
Not at
between
all.
where you were and where you are now
Oh,
is about as night and day as it possibly gets.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm excited to share a little
Yeah. Yeah.
more.
Well, I guess what better person to discuss this idea of uncertainty and fear of the unknown and what the future holds than someone who's gone the whole gamut from
Yeah.
continent to continent. I've got here written in my notes, just in quotations, the chicken. Now, your audience is going to have no idea what the chicken is. So let's start well before the chicken and then work our way towards it.
Okay.
What was life like for little Nalini?
Little Nalini, filled with adventure, actually, funnily enough, on the daily. So hardly spent any time indoors. Didn't have laptops, iPads, mobile phones, obviously, showing my age a little. But had the wildness of the outdoor woods, which was exhilarating. So would go to nursery school or school, because the story of the chicken, I was early school years. Go to school, come home, grab something to eat from mum, and then would be outside playing, with the cat and the dog and the gardener. And, the maid would be indoors helping mum prepare for dinner. And then I'd go and wait at the bottom of the road for my dad's bus, which would pull up right at the top of the road. And then I'd go running, it was like in slow motion. I'd go running towards daddy, and he'd get off the bus and he'd make his walk back to the house. And, evenings spent sitting on the veranda eating ice cream, because the ice cream man rang his bell earlier in the evening, and mum got us ice cream. And so, yeah, quite nostalgic, actually, thinking back to those early years of childhood there.
Yeah, and then we can draw some similarities between that and, say, the Australian kids' upbringing, having the neighborhood ice cream van coming around.
Yeah.
But
I
then
hope we don't lose that,
I hope so too. And I'm curious, this is a tangent, but I'm curious to know if COVID ice cream vans were impacted by, if there was any impact on the economy of ice cream vans during COVID.
That is actually a valid point right there.
I would like to hope you could get a permit as an ice cream van driver, but you probably can't, can you? Because you've got a bunch of grubby kids coming to...
Those aerial videos that you see nowadays of the ghost towns,
Yes.
New York City completely
isolated. And you'll just
isolated.
see the ice cream van
and
with its
an ice cream van.
reverbed out little tune playing like a horror movie. That is quite funny. Okay,
funny thought.
so you had quite a specific experience growing up, a very specific time. It's before the onset of household technologies like the internet and laptops and all of that jazz.
Yeah.
Very adventurous.
Yes.
Very musically minded.
Yes.
Did you enjoy music growing up?
Yes, loved music, particularly classical music, actually.
Mm-hmm.
That was really where my heart was drawn, probably because mum used to play, Chopin and Beethoven and what have yous in the home. And so classical music really was where it all began for me in terms of my musical journey. And then, of course, started learning classical piano from a very, very early age, which, eventually took over my whole childhood.
Yes.
So then the scenes of me playing outside with my friends, kind of faded.
Vanished a little bit, yeah.
It faded.
Did you lose any of the love for piano as it got a little bit more rigorous and scheduled, or did you still enjoy it a fair amount?
No, I think I had gotten into such a discipline of it. My fingers used to itch if ever we went on holiday and there was no piano.
Yeah.
My fingers would physically itch because I was just so desperate to play. No, never.
Okay. And then you would even take that piano skill with you to some of your extracurricular endeavors, like at your father's church, for example.
Yes.
You'd play the piano there.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, from the time I was little, would be the pastor's daughter playing the keys,
Did that create a little bit of a reputation even at school as well?
Yes. Yes.
You were the piano nerd.
I was the piano nerd.
Yep.
You know, lunches,
Mm-hmm.
lunchtime. Where's Nalini? Because she's not in the playground. Well, she'll be in the music room.
Oh, wow. So it was quite the sacrifice even
Yeah.
in school.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. No, fair enough. So you've painted this sort of peculiar image because I think if people were to think of the typical upbringing of a Zimbabwe kid, it's going to look quite different to your upbringing. But then
Yes.
if people look at the typical upbringing of a British kid or an Australian kid, it's going to look quite
So
different as well. So you've always lived in this sort of weird liminal space where you're not quite tied to any
Yeah.
dedicated allegiance.
No.
And then you had this run-in with the inevitable chicken.
Chicken. Okay, so do you want me to tell you the story?
Yes, please.
Okay, you guys ready for this? So I befriended this beautiful family, Ugandan family that lived up the road from us. And the daughter's name was Rita. I'm just going to go there. I'm just going to say it out because Rita, if you're listening, you have to get in touch, sweetheart, because we lost touch after the chicken incident. So we became really good friends. So this was before piano took over my world, okay? So after school, we'd get home, you know, grab a bite to eat and then shoot up the road to Rita's house. And would play in the garden and would now and again run inside and watch her little black and white television if there was a show on. And her mum would always make us red juice and a piece of bread with margarine if she had margarine, or a little bit of jam if she had any jam. Otherwise it was just plain bread. And you know, used to have a whale of a time with her. And then I'd hear my mum yelling from down the road that it was time for dinner, you know, and then I'd run back home and have dinner at home. Anyway, there was this one particular afternoon. I think it was a weekend because I do remember spending most of the day at the house. Because I get to the house and there's this chicken tied to the tree in the garden. And I was quite curious. I'm a little bit like Miss Marples, my cat. You know, when she sees something a little bit out of place, you know, she's very like, oh, you know, life comes to a grinding halt while she investigates what this change of scene is. Well, that was a bit like me. You know, I noticed the chicken straight away because the chicken's never been there before. Now suddenly there's this chicken. So before even going indoors, you know, I acquaint myself with this chicken and I introduced myself to this little guy. And of course I named it pretty quickly.
Mistakes.
Did you say mistakes? Yes.
I believe so.
I know. Anyway, I just remember having the most incredible day with Rita and her family. And we'd play indoors and then we'd go and play in her room for a little while and then back outside again. I'd check on the chicken and make sure it's got food and got water, and it would run around the tree. So it had quite a extended leash, you know, or piece of string probably. And just, honestly, it was just having the best day. Anyway, they were airing the Peanut shows, you know, Charlie Brown and Snoopy on television. So Rita's mum calls us in and invites us to come and watch Snoopy on the telly while she makes us a snack, you know, red juice and a bit of bread. And so we skedaddle off into the lounge and we're all, you know, shoveling food in our gobs and drinking our red juice and watching Snoopy and Charlie Brown. When I suddenly hear this blood-curdling screech come from the kitchen. And I just remember putting my cup down. Oh my goodness, the hair on the back of my neck stood to attention. And I bolted into the kitchen to see what on earth was going on. Well, there on the counter was this flipping head of said chicken, whilst its body was running around the kitchen with blood squirting all over the walls. I mean, it was like a scene from a horror movie. It was the most devastating thing I had ever seen in my little girl life. And I was mortified. Well, I went running from that house, and unfortunately to say, never went back. And then heard later down the line that the family had actually fled and moved somewhere else in the world, never to be seen of again.
Contacted by the FBI for chickens or something, you know?
I think it was a more severe reason for them leaving,
Yeah.
but it just rough.
So that's a bit of a schism.
Man, talk
There's
about...
pre-chicken and post-chicken
There
Nalini.
is definitely the pre-chicken and the post-chicken Nalini. Maybe that's the real reason I immersed myself in piano and never left house again.
Oh, that's a traumatic response. Yeah, okay.
That could be the only reason.
Well, what can you mine from your story of the chicken? Because today we're speaking on this idea of the unknown and having faith and stuff. The chicken story is quite quite hair-raising, but I'd assume that gave you a little bit of a new outlook.
Yes, I think aside from the nightmares that followed, you know, as a little girl, any sort of traumatic event like that can obviously trigger a physical manifestation, right, of the after effects. So aside from the nightmares and my precious mum having to run into my room at night to try and calm me down, I think I certainly learned off the back of that you do never know what is around the corner. But for as long as you have breath, it's okay. It's okay. You're going to be good. You just keep going. You know, because if I look at my life now as a whole, I mean, it's almost as if I've gone from one chicken event to another, to another, to another, you know, and there's been these highs and these lows, this ebb and flow where life is great. And then all of a sudden, you know, something happens and it just rocks you to the core. But that is life. That is life. And unfortunately, when you're born, no one sits you down and goes, right, kid, there's going to be chickens in your life.
Yep.
You know what I mean? No one necessarily prepares you for the traumatic event and for the devastation of the loss of a loved one or whatever it might be. But that is life. And so it's learning to be able to just get back up, dust off the dirt and keep on going.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I certainly learned that from a young age.
Yeah, for sure. And as you said, like, this is something that you've seen time and time again throughout your own life and no doubt through the lives of others as well. I guess moving a few years ahead, being brought up in Mutare in Zimbabwe, you would have faced a lot of very different social issues, a lot of very different political issues, a lot of very different economic issues as well. What did you see during your upbringing in Zimbabwe? What was it like living in that kind of economic environment? And did that have direct impacts on your specific upbringing or your friends, your family, what have you?
Yes. Whew. That's a loaded topic to delve into. My parents converted to Christianity when I was very little. My dad was Hindu, actually, and went on this spiritual journey of trying to discover what was his truth, and came to the point where he found himself saying to God in the early hours of one morning, you know, you've captured my wife's heart, because my mum had become a Christian before he had. And my dad had seen a very evident shift in her, you know, obviously because she changed radically. And he found himself this one morning basically having it out with God in a way, and just said, look, you know, I'll give you a go, but I don't want to be like those hypocritical Christians of yours who, you know, go to church on Sunday and then jump into their neighbor's wife's bed on Monday. he said, if I'm going to do this with you, then I need it to be a year by year, month by month, week by week, day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute, second by second relationship with you. That's the mathematician side of my dad.
Yep.
And he's never looked back. But I know from that very young age, witnessing that transition, there is definitely the pre and post chicken in Nalini's life, but there's also the pre and post conversion in Nalini's life. And my parents' conversion to Christianity radically impacted the trajectory of my life, not just physically, mentally, emotionally, but obviously spiritually also. So growing up in a nation that was, it had obviously been, it had obviously shifted from British rule to local rule, and so in those early days, things were good, and economically things were really picking up. But it was still hard. There was still struggle on a daily basis. And obviously, after my parents converted to Christianity, they went to Bible college and then actually ended up becoming church ministers. So my dad was a Baptist minister, which I still find hilarious to think about even today, in the most respectful of ways, because there you've got this very Indian man, let us turn to Proverbs chapter 8, it's just so hilarious. But he was just the most beautiful pastor. Anyway, obviously, from those early days, they would teach me and my brother and my sister faith. But wow, did we also get to experience the outworking of this faith, this trust and this belief in a God, a creator who is bigger than us, who created heaven and earth, who has created every single human being on this planet with a plan and a purpose. Living in Africa under, such a up and down economic climate, there were moments where my parents would sit us kids down and say, right, we are actually running out of money for this month, and we've still got school fees to pay, and we've got electricity to pay, and we still need to buy the last load of groceries before the month's out. And we just, from a realistic standpoint, we just don't have the resource to be able to get through this month. We need to sit down together and we need to pray and we need to trust that God is going to come through for us. So from a very young age, I am learning that I am not just a physical, mental, and emotional being. I am spiritual also. And here's my opportunity now to put into practice the faith that I have in this God who I cannot see. He's not even in the room. And so we would sit and we would pray. And my mom would just be like, God, you're going to have to come through, because realistically, we're not going to be able to get through this month. And then literally, no joke, a few moments later, there'd be this knock on the front door. And Mum would go to the door, and there on the floor would be this brown paper bag. She'd open the brown paper bag and there'd be money inside the brown paper bag. Sometimes literally to the dollar of what was needed. I mean, experiencing that from such a young age has distilled that level of faith to be able to trust and then witness God come through in ways that are just, oh my gosh, if I just had the time to sit down and articulate what I have seen God do in my life and in my family's life, it is just breathtaking. So growing up in Africa, despite the highs and the lows of living in such a volatile nation, I had my faith, and I had that one thing that I could rely on, that was my constant in a very inconsistent world. God was my constant and remains to be so to this day.
Yeah, and that, I guess, has outworked itself in a good deal of the decisions that you've made.
Yes.
So even the decision to move to the UK, like, what was the context surrounding that? Because that was a little bit crazy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, 18 years of age, had finished my studies as a classical pianist, knew that I was on this earth to bless people with music. Always envisioned that it was music and speaking. But at the tender age of 18, I didn't have much to say, but I had the music. And so knew, and I think that knowing as well came from my faith in God, that I was put on this earth with a plan and a purpose, and I believe that music is part of that plan and that purpose, and so I'm going to pursue it with everything I've got, and so dedicated my whole childhood to prepare for it. So by the time I graduated and had enough money in the bank to actually take that leap of faith, I was quite confident to get on that plane and disappear off into the sunset and leave everything I had known and loved my whole childhood to be obedient to what I felt I was put on this earth to do.
And yet, even in cases where that confidence wasn't there, you guys have still acted out of faith. So
Yes.
I guess the infamous example that a lot of our listeners who've been following Under the Rug for some time would know would be the upheaval and move to Australia that happened after your experiences with your old church.
Yeah.
Because that was the pits of confidence. I'm doubtful you guys were feeling all too prepped and primed to be moving into the outback, middle of nowhere from, just outside of London, one of the busiest cities on the planet. And yet you still went.
Yeah. So even when there were days where we were being told that we were making the biggest mistake of our lives to up sticks and leave, and even when we landed in Australia, Western Australia particularly, was just coming out of its worst drought in history. And so it was literally like this barren wasteland when we arrived. And even then I remember thinking, oh my gosh, what are we doing? We've just arrived in this nation we know nothing about, have no contacts. We've got 2 small children. Are we completely insane? And yet, whenever I would bring this matter before God and I would go, God, what are we doing? Like, are you sure? Is this where we're meant to be? Somehow he would bring some sort of confirmation in my heart that, no, you're okay, kid. You're good. I've got you. You're going to be all right. Just keep trusting me. Just keep listening. Just keep your ear attuned to my voice. I'll direct you. And he has. Without fail, he has directed.
There's been some fairly specific directing requirements on his part because you guys have traveled a fair amount. I think that's safe to say.
Yeah.
You've lived in a fair amount of locations and locales. And one thing that comes with constantly moving around the globe is the issue of visas.
Oh.
What do you have to say on the topic of visas?
Okay, so we have a crazy story on the topic of visas. Oh my goodness. Okay. Yes. Make sure you're nice and comfy for this one because, wow, this is going to touch your heart. So, with all the moving over the years, and as a result of that, I have not seen my sister in over 14 years. So I haven't seen her since leaving London. And we left London back in 2008. And at the start of 2022, my parents, who live here in Australia, in Melbourne with us, announced that for their 50th wedding anniversary, which is September 2022, they want all 3 of their children in the same room. So at the start of 2022, I knew, right, kid, you've got a few months to get your act together because come September 2022, you're going to need to make sure that you are in the same room as your sister and your brother. Now, my brother had moved to Australia a few years ago, so it's just my sister now. So my sister and I had already been having this conversation early on in the year that she needed to come. But what we decided to do was, Beans as mum and dad knew that my sister was coming, we decided to surprise them with my sister's hubby and her 2 children to come along as well. So all this prep and skullduggery, as we call it, was happening behind the scenes, and my parents had absolutely no idea what was about to unfold for them. So we're getting to the point where my sister and her hubby are due to fly on Monday. It is the week before. I get a text on the Thursday from my sister saying, "How long does it usually take to get a holiday visa to Australia?" Okay.
Uh-oh.
So now I'm just like, hair on the back of my neck is up, the whole chicken incident revisited. So I text her back, "What do you mean, how long does it take? I thought you applied for your holiday visas ages ago." Yeah, we did. 2 of them have come through, but 2 haven't. So the 2 that hadn't was for her hubby and her little son, Nathan, who was 9 at the time. Hannah and Ariana, her daughter, their visas had come through. So now I'm just like, oh my gosh, it's Thursday. These guys are supposed to be leaving Botswana on Sunday, straight after church, because they pastor a church out there. Straight after church on Sunday, they're supposed to be getting into their car, loading up the kids, loading up the luggage, and shooting off to Johannesburg in South Africa to stay the night and then fly out on Monday to Australia. And she's texting me this on Thursday. So to say we did not sleep Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night is an understatement. We did everything we possibly could. Got to the point where I actually had a doctor's appointment with my mum's doctor to ask if she would consider doing a letter to immigration on medical grounds, because, my mum's been unwell, and we just were like, we've got to cover every single angle. Anyway, the plan was Sunday, they were still going to go to Johannesburg. They were going to wake up at the crack of dawn on Monday morning. Their flight was at lunchtime. They're going to wake up at the crack of dawn Monday, shoot to Australia House in the city, in the town centre of Johannesburg, and line up to speak to somebody in immigration to then hopefully get back to the airport in time with visa. That was the plan. Oh my goodness. I think the biggest thing out of this whole experience was I realized that over the years, whenever I've hit a crisis in my life, I've always gone back to the person who taught me faith in the first place, which is my mum and dad. But because this whole thing was meant to be a total surprise for them, we just couldn't. My sister and I spoke. We were like, do we just break it to them? Do we just ruin the surprise now? No, we just couldn't. We knew we're going to have to do this on our own. This is between us and God now. And to say that we stormed heaven in our prayers, no joke, that's literally what we did. I could not sleep those few nights. I was just like, Lord, you have come through before. Please, you have to come through again. I had pictures of the little boy, Nathan, having to be told that his visa hasn't been granted and he's not going to meet his auntie Nalini for the first time. And I remember weeping and just being like, God, you've got to come through. You've got to come through. This is a non-negotiable. Like, I cannot stand the thought of him not being allowed to come. Anyway, they did what they said they were going to do. They went to church Sunday morning. My sister's hubby preached. All their church people were super excited and going, wow, you're off. We're so excited for you. And of course they had to bite their tongue because visa still hadn't come through. Anyway, they get in the car and do the drive to Johannesburg. Still no signs of the visa. All Sunday afternoon, Sunday night, still no signs of the visa. They went to bed Sunday night. My poor sister was getting up throughout the night to check her emails to see if anything had come through. Still nothing. 4 o'clock in the morning. My sister's hubby, JJ, pats her on the shoulder and says, the visa's come through. And my sister goes, if you're taking the mick, I'm going to slap you across the chops right now. And he said, no, we've just received the email. The visas have come through. Oh my goodness. Can I just say, we knew that they would come through. I just had this knowing in my heart that it was going to come through. That yes, sometimes God leaves us hanging right until the last moment. But I knew deep down in my heart that He was going to come through for us. But even when He did, we were still gobsmacked. Like, we were still astounded, could not believe it. I mean, we were squealing from ear to ear. And then reliving this whole event and sharing it with our parents was the most exhilarating moment. Honestly, it felt to me like my parents were listening to this story and thinking to themselves, we've taught them well.
Yeah.
We've taught them well. We've handed over that baton, and now they will continue. For generations to come, this level of faith will continue in their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren. It will continue for generations to come.
Yeah, and we'd love to just put it to you, the listeners, as well, because that's just such a phenomenal story of belief and faith, and we want to hear from you guys. Like, what are stories that you've had where there was no one to turn to, and yet you soldiered on and had faith?
Yes, absolutely. And even for those of you who are facing crisis point right now, and like Ramon said, you have no one to turn to, no physical person to turn to who can help you through, then maybe now is the time to consider bringing it to God in heaven and saying, listen, I know I don't know you, and I realize I don't necessarily have a relationship with you, but I need you to come through for me. I need you to come through for me.
Yeah. And we'd love for you to get in touch with us. Like,
yes.
Send us an email. We've got an email in the description, info@nalinitranquim.com. Because these stories of faith are not only really heartwarming for us to read and listen to and respond to, but also for other people in the community to hear the ripple impact that can have on those around you, being willing to share your own testimony.
Absolutely.
Is so encouraging.
It's so encouraging. It kind of, I don't know, for me personally, hearing stories like this, it reinvigorates something on the inside of me that says, kid, you can get through anything. It doesn't matter what you're facing right now. Nothing is impossible with God. And you're going to be good, and you're going to come out stronger on the other side. I mean, when I think of this story now, just the lives that have been impacted by the sharing of the story and by people hearing it, it's invigorating, and it brings a sense of hope renewed, that, wow, these things do still happen even today. Even as tough as life is for many of us right now, there are still these miracles happening. And it just, it's like a big cuddle.
Yeah, for sure. Just bringing this episode to a close, I guess, would be a quick word of encouragement. Because for you, I guess, one through line I'm seeing through all of this is just how impressive it is to look at things in retrospect, how far you've come from this extremely peculiar and specific cultural upbringing, little Nalini's pre and post chicken incident, the terror and horror you were feeling at the time, but then how that allowed you to grow stronger, and then every subsequent chicken event that would come up, and the person that you've become today.
Yeah. I think if there's anything that I can leave you with today, it is this. Remember that the difficult seasons do not stay. They are not there to remain. Okay? They come and they go. And so always look at the situation that you're in that's not very comfortable, that's extremely challenging and confronting. Always look at it as an opportunity for growth. In you as an individual, in your character, in your relationships with your loved ones. Use those times in your life as an opportunity for growth. What am I going to learn through this? What am I gaining from this? Yes, it's hard and it's brutal and I just want to quit. I can tell you now, those difficult seasons are the seasons that train your resilience muscles. You really become acquainted with who you are and what you're capable of enduring. So I think if there's anything that I can say, it is just take heart that it is here in front of you right now, yes, but it is not here to stay. So it will come to pass. So yeah, I think if you want to reach out, maybe you don't want to necessarily speak on a public forum about some of the stuff that you're navigating right now, then reach out, like Ramon said, flick us an email, info@nalinitranquim.com. Always love to hear from you.
What's going on?
Thank you for listening to the Under the Rug podcast with Nalini Tranquim.